At my wife's graveside, the wind tore at the flowers and the world felt smaller. People murmured comfort and left. No one asked the quiet question that sat in my chest. If Daniel found out about the other house, the little place Eleanor bought secretly by the shore, would he still see me as his father, or just the man holding the map to his next paycheck? My name is Thomas Gray. I'm 73. I married Eleanor when we were young and broke and stubborn. We built a life of simple things: a kitchen table, a crooked fence, a garden that fed us more than our bellies, it fed our souls. The week before she died, she took my hand and said, quietly, "Tom, promise me you won't tell Daniel yet. Let this be our place to grieve when we need it." I promised. The day after the funeral, the house echoed. The teacups on the rack looked too neat. Her jacket hung empty by the door like a ghost. Daniel arrived mid-morning with that strained grief that sits on a man like a suit, 2 sizes too small. He walked through the rooms with the look of a man calculating what fits in his life and what doesn't. "Dad," he said blunt, "we need to go over things. There are bills, payments. We should think about selling this place. Sell this place." The words were a blade. I thought of Eleanor humming while she kneaded dough. I thought of the crooked fence she'd painted. I thought of the nights we'd sat on the porch and listened to frogs. "We'll talk," I said. Later. But later was the problem. Eleanor's secret house was not an asset to be parceled. It was a promise she made where she kept her laughter when the world was cruel. It sat far from our town, with a porch that creaked just right, with a view of the sea where she had once said she wanted to watch the tide with me when we were old. She bought it alone, paid it off in small, unseen sums while we paid for Daniel's schooling and tucked money away for miseries we couldn't name. When Daniel pressed, "Why didn't you tell me?" I felt smaller than I had at his birth. I could have told him everything then and there. About the afternoons Eleanor and I hid there, the slapdash repairs we made, the quiet promises. But the look in his eyes, less grief, more entitlement, made the world tilt. So I let the secret sit like a warm ember inside me. For Eleanor. For the hush of one last private place. For the memory of being simply her husband, not a ledger entry. That evening, Daniel left with a list of chores and a polite, distracted embrace. He kissed my forehead like someone tucking a receipt into a wallet. When the door closed, I went into my room and took Eleanor's last note from the drawer. Her handwriting wavered, but her message did not. Keep it for us. Not for their balance sheets. I folded the paper and held it to my chest until the house stopped spinning. I didn't know then how much that silence would cost me, but I promised myself one thing. I would not let that place become a dollar sign, while her lullaby still echoed in its rafters. I hadn't meant to lie. I had meant only to keep a promise between 2 people who'd weathered half a century together. But the world measures time in bank statements and impatience, and Daniel is of a different weather. He returned 2 days later with a folder and a thin, resentful smile. "Dad, if there's another property, we need to be transparent. We can make plans. We can sell it and split it. You shouldn't be holding out on me." I set the kettle and let the water sing. Eleanor would have said, "Don't waste your breath." But grief makes you brittle. Confrontation ricochets. "It isn't about money," I said. "It's about something she wanted kept." His jaw worked. "That's convenient. You're shutting me out. What else has she hidden?" "We deserve to know." When he used deserve, I felt the phrase like a lie. Deserve? Daniel had grown into a man who expected inheritance like weather. He spoke of needs, business plans, mortgage help, a new life in a city where status mattered. He didn't speak of memories. He didn't speak in the hushed, reverent tone one saves for graves or old quilts. That afternoon, a neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, stopped by and brought me soup. She was the sort of woman who'd known Eleanor since shoes were new. "Tom," she said, "Daniel's been through the records at the county. He asked the clerk a few pointed questions. Be careful." My heart knocked against my ribs. I pictured Daniel in the office, hands on paper, eyes bright at the idea of treasure. I pictured him in the ditch between what's mine and what's his. That night I visited the small cottage by the shore in my mind. It wasn't large, 2 rooms, a sagging porch, a small wild garden where Eleanor insisted on planting Lily. I remembered carrying the first box there, watching her dance barefoot on a floor she'd scrub it herself, laughing that this was our secret. If Daniel dug and found the deed, if he realized Eleanor had kept a house without telling the son who now demanded to know, would he call it betrayal? Or would he call it theft of opportunity? The more I thought, the more I felt cobwebs of dread spin around my chest. By morning, Daniel had approached a real estate agent. He was professional, polite, thinly veiled urgency. He said, "We may need to evaluate any and all properties under the estate." He left a card. He left in the car with the engine like a counting heartbeat. I sat on the porch until dusk. The tide in my chest rose and fell. I took out Eleanor's note again and folded it like a secret kite. I whispered to the quiet, to the promise between the two of us. "I can keep this from him. I can." The words were both vow and prayer. The search began quietly by others. A polite clerk, a line of questions, a faint scent of dignity being unwrapped and examined. Daniel asked, and the county records obliged, transfers, parcels, mortgages. He asked the right questions in the right tone. He wanted proof. I watched the way he listened, the way hope softened his face with the prospect of solving small, practical scraps of pain with money. I knew I could fight him with words and anger, but Eleanor had taught me something about decisions and dignity. She once said, "We give when we can, Tom, but we protect what keeps us whole." The house kept us whole. It was not an asset, it was an altar. When Daniel called that evening, voice taught, "Dad, the records show a property in your name near the coast. We can put it on the market. We can—" I cut him off. "No," I said. The single word was like a slammed door. "We will not sell it. You can't just—" Daniel began. "I can," I said. "Your mother purchased it in secret because she wanted a place to remember us. She put it in my name because she trusted I would use it as we intended. You can be furious. You can be hurt. But this was her wish." He became louder then. The words were sharp. "You're being selfish. You're keeping us from what's rightfully ours." "You're right to be angry," I answered quietly. "You have a right to your feelings. But you do not have the right to turn our memory into currency." His silence that came after was different from the stunned, hurt silence at the funeral. This one was a hard building thing. "If you won't sell, I'll pursue legal options," he said finally. "I'll talk to a lawyer." Hearing his words felt like frost. A legal fight between father and son that the very thought shook me. I had no desire to make courts our battleground. Eleanor would have wept. So I made a choice of my own. If the law could take something and turn it into a commodity, I would use the law first. I went to the lawyer the next morning with Eleanor's faded letter and the deeds. I signed papers I'd been putting off, trust forms, charitable conveyance arrangements. I directed that the title would, on my death or by immediate irrevocable transfer should I choose, pass to a local family shelter or a family in need chosen by a panel of community elders. When I left the lawyer's office, the sky had a hard clarity. I felt both hollow and strangely buoyant. I had used the same tools, the legal forms, the deeds, the signatures to lock the house away from greed and secure it for compassion. I knew Daniel would rage. I knew he would fight, but I also knew that Eleanor would have smiled at this too stubborn. people making one stubborn, loving decision. That night I walked to the shoreline in the cold. The small house's memory was a warm ember inside me. I pressed my palm to the thought of Eleanor and felt the tremble of the promise kept. When Daniel learned of the trust and the charitable conveyance, he came like a storm. "You can't do this," he shouted at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd once learned to blot his tears with napkins. "That's our money, our future. You sold it to strangers." "You mean you sold my future?" I answered. "Because for you, everything is about the next step business. Profit, the next city. For me, it was never a balance sheet." He accused me of selfishness and of betrayal. He said he felt robbed, that I had taken from him. I listened and felt the weight in my chest like a bell. "You can take me to court," I told him quietly. "You can contest the trust. You can drag my name through filings and expense and witnesses. But the choices Eleanor made she did with care. I did what she asked." He left the house slamming doors and words behind him. He called the lawyer. The papers were examined, cross-checked, stamped. The trust was legally sound, irrevocable in the way Eleanor had wished. There was nothing to salvage with litigation except more heartbreak. Days turned into weeks. Daniel's calls slowed from anger to pleading. At one point he stood on the porch in the rain and asked, eyes red, "Why would you choose others over your own son?" The question cut like a cold knife. "Because your mother promised us the house to be a haven for those who needed shelter," I said. "Because sometimes family is not only those who share your blood, but those who need you when they have nothing." She wanted it given where it would mean life, not more consumption. Months later, the community panel selected a young family displaced by fire. They were shaken and empty but full of stubborn hope. On the day they moved in, the children ran across the grass, and one small girl climbed onto my lap and called me Grandpa before she even knew my name. Her smile made something heavy lift inside me. Daniel did not come to the ribbon cutting. He wrote a short, formal letter asking for forgiveness and explaining how his world had been mangled by ambition. I slid it into a drawer and left it there. That night, sitting on Eleanor's favorite chair, I felt peace that was gentle and absolute. I had kept a promise. I had honored her heart. I had chosen to shelter children rather than line pockets. If Daniel's anger never passed, if he never forgave me, then that was his sorrow to carry. I had kept my promise to my wife, and in return, I found other hands to hold mine when the world was cold. In the quiet afterward, I walked to the little window that looked out over the sea and whispered into the wind, "We did the right thing." The waves answered like applause.